Your monthly subscription box from postflybox.com includes all the materials needed to tie a dozen flies, along with some extra goodies. The Blockhead Popper is a fly that's specifically designed to make a ton of commotion as it's retrieved along the water's surface. Bass, pike, and larger panfish seem to find it all but irresistible. The Blockhead Popper begins with a heavy-duty size 8 hook. Get the hook firmly secured in the jaws of your tying vise, then load a bobbin with a spool of black unithread. Pick up one of the black foam heads and place it on top of the hook shank behind the eye. Mark the rearmost portion of the block on the hook shank with your thumbnail. Place your tying thread at that location and start taking wraps to secure it to the hook. Once the thread is well anchored, lift the excess tag up and snip it off close. Separate out a single marabou feather from the rest. With the tip of the feather out over the hook eye, gently preen the lower fibers down to expose just the tip. Then anchor the first few pulled down fibers to the hook shank with wraps of tying thread. Trapping the fibers like this helps to reinforce the brittle stem. Lift the tip up and break or snip it off close. Strip off the lowest fibers on the feather to a point where the stem begins to dramatically thin. Get hold of the stem with hackle pliers and lift the feather up to vertical. Use the back of your tying scissors to lightly fold the fibers back on either side of the stem. Wet your fingers and start taking wraps with the feather, pulling the fibers rearward as you go. Keep taking touching wraps with the feather stem up the hook shank. Stop just shy of your first thread wraps, then anchor the feather stem and snip the excess off close. Pull the fibers back and take thread wraps rearward to pin them there. Snip 3 or 4 strands of Flashabou free from the hank, then locate the midpoint of the strands. Place the midpoint against the near side of the hook and take thread wraps to secure it there. Then, fold the forward pointing portion back and anchor it to the far side of the hook. End with your tying thread at the base of the marabou. Pick up one of the red saddle hackle feathers and strip off the lower fibers where the stem is particularly thick. Preen the lower fibers down as you did with the marabou feather and anchor them in the same manner. Again, the idea is to help reinforce the brittle stem at the tie-in point. Once the feather's anchored well, snip the excess tip off close. Again, get hold of the stem with hackle pliers, and here too, use your scissors to fold the fibers rearward on either side of the stem. Take touching wraps up the hook shank, ending right at that first wrap of tying thread. Use thread wraps to anchor the stem at that point and coax the fibers rearward. Reach in with your tying scissors and snip the excess stem off close. The tail of the fly, nicely preened out, should look something like this. Get hold of your whip finish tool and use it to do a 5 or 6 turn whip finish, seat the knot well, and snip your tying thread free. Once again, pick up one of the foam blocks and locate the hole in its front face. Insert your bobbin into the hole and push it through so it exits in the center of the small face at the rear of the block. Use the tips of your tying scissors to slightly widen the opening of that hole on the back of the block. Test fit the block by sliding the rear end of it over top of the hook eye and down the hook shank. The thread wraps should fit into that enlarged hole that you just made. Really make sure everything looks good and the block fits well before proceeding. Remove the block and pick up a small amount of superglue, here Fly Tyer Z-Mint. Apply a light skim to the entire exposed hook shank and to the thread wraps. Quickly slip the foam block back down the hook shank and over the thread wraps, then give it a real good squeeze. Squeezing will set the adhesive and should firmly anchor the foam block to the hook shank. If some of the Flashabou strands are a bit long, trim them off to about the same length as the black marabou fibers. Now, pick up a small amount of superglue and apply a little drop to the near side upper corner of the block. Then, do the same on the far side of the block. Get hold of one of the 3D eyes and place it on the glue on the near side of the hook, and make sure the eye is anchored well. Do the same with a second eye on the far side. The eyes should be mirror images of each other. And that's the Blockhead Popper. Although they can be a little cumbersome to cast, once they land on the water, they're a ton of fun to fish and routinely elicit rather dramatic takes.